So everybody, welcome to the Solutionary Rail organizing call. We are starting a series of podcasts related to stakeholders and the Solutionary Rail project. We've already done some interviews before, one especially with Angela Logan from the Moving Forward Network, and Ron Kamenkow from Railroad Workers United. But Diane Wittner is an old friend and collaborator. We worked on a series of 87 podcasts over the years called Conversations with the Cabinet. So she's been good enough to come back and give us a hand at producing this series so that we start really building those relationships across the various sectors whose interests intersect with railroads, but maybe folks who others just have never met. Our interests may be different, but they it seems like they intersect at the railroads. And if we're going to create a coalition that is strong enough to move such an ambitious vision of Solutionary Rail forward, it feels absolutely crucial that we understand what are the fundamental needs of each community that we're in coalition with. And so we're honored to start that. So it might be that if we hear noise, we may, because we are recording this, we may mute you. Don't be offended. We're just trying to preserve get the best quality recording we possibly can with this tool, which is a pretty cool tool. For those of you who haven't downloaded it or are just joining us by phone, it's really a pretty simple tool to use on your computer if you feel comfortable with that. And then you can see the video. We will be sharing some slides today. We will take about 30 minutes, about 20 minutes for the initial interview section, and then with some grace period and some time for Q&A. And I am going to let Diane Wittner introduce our guest today.
Thank you, Bill. I am so honored to be starting this podcast series, and we have the great delight of our first guest being Richard Mabion of Kansas City, Kansas, not Kansas City, Missouri.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm going to let Richard tell us about himself, but I want to give you a little bit of an explanation as to why we invited Richard to be our first guest. We were at the Moving Forward Network conference in Houston last month. And as Richard has said in another context, it was an incredible community of people because, again, as Richard has said, the Moving Forward Network is maybe the only or one of the few national environmental justice organizations, coalitions around the country that is stakeholder-led and community-based. And while we were at that conference, we heard story after story after story of community members who have fought the powers that be in order to protect their communities from the ravages of transport-related devastation, often in relation to diesel exhaust and the public health consequences, both from rail infrastructure and from trucks. Richard's unique contribution, I got a little bit of a sense of it at that conference. And then in researching for tonight's podcast, Richard's contribution is that, from what I can tell, Richard is one of the pioneers of environmental justice perspective. Prior to it being a kind of in phrase, which so many people use the word environmental justice, and there's even the acronym EJ, and everybody kind of shakes their head and knows what that means. Richard's been working in environmental justice for many, many years, and have been trying, and I think successful at, linking unlikely communities in order for those who are the biggest stakeholders to have agency and be in charge of their communities, their futures, their health, their family's health, and their economic health. But I don't want to say any more. Richard, I would like you to tell us, if you could give us before we ask you some nitty-gritty questions, if you could tell us a little bit about your background, the organizations you founded, the organizations you have worked with and are working with, and just a few of your awards, and then we can get on to some questions. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I really, really appreciate you all asking me to participate in this particular program. And I love your pioneering style, because it fits my personality. I think I was born to be a pioneer. I just want y'all to know that, going way back in history. This is a little known fact about me, and then I'll bring you up. My mother was the last president for the state of Kansas Negro School Systems PTA for the state of Kansas. And the PTA for the Negro school system were the bosses. They did the hiring and the firing and the whole bit. They set the curriculum and the whole stuff. It was an elected position. The reason I say that is because I was 4 years old when she was got that position, and when we started going into the integration process, I was learning to be an integrationist from 4 years till they integrated schools. So I just throw that out there because that's how long it's actually been that I've been involved in that, as Diane said, the environmental justice aspect of life. Of course, back then it wasn't called that, but it is also the reason that I got into the environmental movement. Because in 9/11, I'm one of those small businesses that suffer the consequences of small businesses going under because of the economy and the whole deal. And when I looked around to try to see what I was going to regroup, I discovered this environmental world. And my guru is named David Korten. For those of you who may know him, if you don't, look him up. David Korten, Korten. He has a book out called The Great Turning. I read that book, and that's where I got my motivation to get involved in the environmental world. He had a statement in there that said that the leadership for the worlds to come, and that's just dealing in the environmental world, would come from the people who had suffered the most injustices in life. The reason he felt that was going to happen was because those people have learned to survive under hardships. And that's what the degradation of this planet is going to cause. A scientist once said it's going to be like Mad Max, where people would kill you for an ounce of gas. So when I read that, I realized from my past civil rights experience that if someone didn't get involved and start dealing with people of color, that when it came for those kind of leaders to take their place, they wouldn't exist. And therefore, there I became who I am now. In that process of meeting David Korten, of course, which I went and dined, he invited me to a conference in Berkeley, and I got a chance to meet Van Jones. I am a student of Van Jones. I went to Van Jones's Green Falls School. So now you got my white and my black background of environmentalism to bring me to this point. As I went back in, after meeting them two, I met David Korten in April of 2007. I met Van Jones in June of 2007. At the same time, I met Paul Hawkins at the same conference. So I met some heavyweights to begin with. And in November of 2007, I created a business called Building a Sustainable Earth Community. It's a multicultural environmental organization. And we created a conference called Breaking the Silence, which was a statement out of David Korten's book, because we need to break the silence about what's going on this planet. And in November of 2007, just to give you an idea how fast-tracked that was, we created the conference, and it was the first people of color conference, and probably the only one that's around that was people of color led. Not, it was all people of color, but it was people of color led, and 1/3 of the people who attended the conference were people of color, and we've been rolling ever since. That's what got me started. There was a guy named John Rissenbrink, who was the co-founder of the Green Party, that was in town in 2008 for a political, because that was a political year. And he made a comment. I went to one of his speeches, and he said that the environmental movement was the first movement that had a chance to change policy in this country since the civil rights movement. But he said he hoped that the environmental leaders didn't make the same mistakes that the civil rights leaders did and allowed the movement to become a political issue. Now, everyone listening to this, if you stop and think about it, we've been stuck on it being a political issue, and that was 2008. So I understood where it was coming from and decided what I wanted to do was to do what I did in the civil rights movement. I broke away from grants. I broke away from those being in the box. I broke away from limitations that you get when you're working off other people's money. And I went out and started me a janitorial company. And I was able to hire people out of the low-income community, paying them $10 an hour. You know, back in, that was 1982. $10 an hour was a lot of money for a janitor in 1982. We had contracts with Hallmark cards, Toys R Us, Marshalls, JT Maxx. The reason I did it is because I can speak the King's English language. So I was able to go into those places and develop relationship with bosses, and they ended up coming out. And I hired people that knew what they was doing. I don't know nothing about it, but I hired people who knew what they were doing. And when Rinsenbrink said that, I knew that that's what you needed in the environmental movement. So I'm getting ready to show you some slides, if that's okay, Diane.
Absolutely.
To show you where I took what David Corton said and turned it into a hands-on program in the inner city, teaching young people how to deal with scientific circumstances. This one is dealing with a high school science department that we got a contract from EPA on this one through a environmental organization. And what we did is went in and taught the students how to scientifically test water. I love saying that because when you look at those pictures, you see the kind of inner city students that we have hoodies on. I love looking at the little brothers with the hoodies on that's out there with test tubes in the hand, testing water, learning how that process goes. We had them digging in the water and categorizing the different insects and stuff they would get out of it, and then flip to the next one. And the reason that I have this next picture, when he flips it down, this one, is because of the meaning behind it. This is the kid that no one's reaching. I'm not putting this young man down. He could be sitting out there looking at this. But this young man is the one that's out there that's getting themselves in all kind of trouble. They can go either way. For us to be able to go to this school and go to this class and find a way to get this young man involved in scientifically testing waters while he's sitting there dealing with a thermometer and stuff, made me know for sure this was a process we had to be able to do to reach students. We're community people. We're not school people. The school was allowing us to create this program. So they're being taught, not by the school folks, but from folks out in the neighborhoods. I had a really great scientist that was able to create these programs. Okay, go to the next one. So what we were able to do was, I didn't tell y'all, I'm the first black board member for the Kansas Sierra Club, still the only black board member they got. I'm also the president of the Kansas City, Kansas NAACP. I was a Sierra Club member before I became an NAACP member. And I joined that NAACP unit because I wanted to work, because the Sierra Club was trying to find ways to work in the low-income communities. And I knew that was a good door opener for me to be a Sierra Club member and get involved with the NAACP. After 2 or 3 years, they ended up making me their president. And I ran on an environmental ticket. I don't care to talk about how much white folks don't like black folks. I'm not raising the next generation with that concern. I use my position to teach the next generation how to be prepared for a future that they're going to have to live, where they need to love science and they need to love technology. So what we did is, once we got those students trained, with the part of the grant we had, we were able to hire 10 of them at $15 an hour. I like paying people that kind of money. And one of their assignments was to come to an NAACP meeting and teach the NAACP members and also some volunteers from in town how to do what they had learned, scientifically test water. And that's what you see going on in that picture. They are sitting there literally, they took the responsibility on like troopers. You would have thought these young people had been doing this all their life. They raised to the occasion. All right, go to the next one. This was one where Hilton Garden Inn manager, in that middle picture on the top, that's him with the white leather coat on, with the white guy with the black leather coat on. He came to me and said, you know, we the Hilton Garden Inn. Richard, can you do something to help me put a garden in around here? So I went up and got some middle school students. That's who's in that first picture on the top on the left. And they came over with a community garden group, and they were able to put this community garden in, and it went so well. And one of the conclusions was when the food was grown, the cooks came in with the kids after they went out and picked and harvested some of the food they had grown, took them downstairs in the kitchen and prepared them all a meal. As far as I'm concerned, that's a lesson that they remember. I remember now, this is what he was talking about. This is what I did in the civil rights world when we created the janitorial service. We were able to work with people and teach them things and skills that was going to benefit them in life. Same thing is going on here. Instead of being out there, being in a box with an environmental program that telling you what you can and cannot do, we used our own initiative. I used my own instinct to be able to create the kind of program. And you can see multiculturally, kids are learning, and this is all part of school. That's something, again, they bring their families by there even now. And this was 2 years ago when we did this, just because this is something they can take ownership in. Next one. Okay, now this is where we are in that process. And this is the last picture at this part. And then I'll come back to you, Diane. We have started a training session with the staff of inner city social service agencies. Sitting in that room right now is the staff from the leading Latino organization, because you got the NAACP involved. We have public housing, and we all got public housing across the nation. The staff from public housing are sitting in that room. EPA staff are sitting in that room. And the session that we're working on them with is about diesel emission. Okay, now we up to diesel emission, sir. Okay, Diane.
Thank you so much, Richard. You know, it's just fascinating, and I have a background as an educator, and you're right. Kids need agency. They also need the incentive of having a decent hourly wage to do something. And that's beautiful self-empowerment. And it's wonderful that you've implemented what you've learned so concretely. I do have a question. When you were doing the water testing with them, first of all, was it in the rivers themselves, the Missouri and the Kansas rivers? Because I know they both meet in Kansas City.
We went to lakes, and we went to ponds. We went to, like if they had an inner city, we have one that's called Big 11 Lake that's right in the middle of the city.
Okay.
Where people would they discovered it had an E. coli value that was like 100% over what it should be. So they were in areas where they could actually learn from. And we also went to one creek, not so much a river, but a creek.
Okay. Thank you. That's good to know. So it's not like you're doing testing of the water to see about if there was any kind of diesel exhaust impact. That's not quite what you're doing yet.
Yeah, but what we were doing was testing the water to show them how the water treatment plants actually work. You know, after Flint, it's easy to be able to do this because we're talking individual responsibility. We cannot rely on government agencies to make the determination whether you should drink your water or not. It's each and every individual needs to be in a position to make that determination.
Right. Well, we sure have learned that. I mean, after Flint. Yeah. Thank you so much. What we spoke about when I met you in Houston, one of the things that is very much on your mind, or two things that are very much on your mind that you mentioned to me, and I'd love for you to talk about them in any order you wish, is the impact of the new Amazon plant. I love the name. It's so Orwellian, the Amazon Fulfillment Center, on diesel truck emissions in the area, but also something that I see you have looked into, which is the impact of increased activity in coastal ports far away from Kansas City, like in LA, if there's going to be increased freight traffic from LA all the way into Kansas City, which is the center of the country. What are some of your concerns around both of those and some of your thoughts, especially in relation to the impact of low-income communities, both public health impact as well as opportunity or lack thereof in terms of employment?
Well, for those who don't know, BNF Santa Fe Railroad made an agreement with cargo coming in out of LA and Long Beach, that instead of that cargo and in those containers being offloaded to the LA area, and then from there trucks would pick them up and move them. Our illustrious Warren Buffett, I love the man, but still he's definitely capitalist, and I have no problem with that. We live in a capitalistic world. Found out a way to be able to show LA where he could help them cut down on their pollution problem by putting those containers, after they've been placed in warehouses around the LA area, on his trains. And then he has his trains bringing those containers from LA to right outside Kansas City in a little town called Edgerton. And he built an intermodal in Edgerton, which has made the Kansas City have one of the largest inland ports in the nation. The reason they chose Kansas City is because the highway dissects here. I-35 coming from north and south, 70 coming from east and west. So now we have those containers sitting here in the Kansas City metropolitan area. And their biggest concern was now trucks could travel from different places, pick them up here from the intermodal and take them back to wherever their destination was. But what happened, just like in LA, and when we go through the slides, I'll point this stuff out, companies decided, well, we're going to cut our costs, our transportation costs, by building warehouses by the intermodal. So Amazon comes up and decides to build a plant right next to the intermodal, and then turn around and decided to build one that's less than 30 miles away, which is in Kansas City, Kansas. Build another one, same size, 2 plants within earshot of each other. And in the process of doing that, when we start going through this, I'll show you the increase in truck traffic, because now we got all of these trucks coming in and out of Kansas City. I went to a meeting last week with the guy who was the economic development director that is all smiles about having Amazon coming in town. And he's talking to a low-income community about the availability of jobs, even though I can't guarantee you, he says, but look at all the jobs that we're bringing into town. And when I talked to Diane about it, we both started talking about it really puts the low-income community in a very difficult situation, because they have to make a decision between in fact, when I got up to speak at that meeting, I had to make a presentation there too. I didn't even address it because that wasn't while I was there. I'll go back and talk to those people at another time, because you have to make a decision if you're going to deal with health or you're going to deal with employment. When you have people who are struggling in neighborhoods with not having jobs, and all of a sudden here comes a company into your community that's got 1,000 jobs, at this point, even though they won't start hiring until like the middle of the year, and they got a 6-week hiring period. So right now it's all fluff. The powers to be need fluff, so there's no one to be complaining about the folks coming in. So the decision becomes one for people. Do we concentrate on health, or do we concentrate on employment? That's major. That's a big time decision to put on the backs of a struggling community that needs jobs. So that's a new area that I know that we'll have to deal with. Can you go through the slides for me, and I'll hit those while we're here? The name of the organization that we're working with, and I have a coworker up there in the corner named Leticia, if you see her picture up there, is what it on is I made her clean. What is it? Clean Air Now? That's the name of the organization. We started out as Diesel Health Network, and I don't know where that came from, but now we're the Clean Air Now organization. I guess that's not the first one, because that's showing the routes I was telling you about, how they bring in the traffic, bringing the goods in from LA to Kansas City. And you can see down there at Houston, that's I-35 that also comes straight up through Kansas City. So it's giving us a lot of truck traffic. There's another slide. Flip to another slide. These are the slides, some of the slides that we showed in that session I talked to you about, where we had the staff in town. how to protect your family, your community from the health risks of diesel exhaust and other air pollutant. The reason we're talking to the social service staff, everyone that has all these great grandiose programs are misfiring when it comes to low-income communities. Most people in those communities are still as clueless as they were in 2006. And we've had plenty of people attempting to do things with them. Our kids in our program know more than the parents because they are actually learning something. So we're going to deal with the social service workers because they have the front line hands-on with people. And we want them talking to people about things they need to do to protect themselves. Okay, go to the next one. This is the area of the Burlington Northern Railroad called the maintenance shop. These engines will sit there and run. They can run 24 hours. I mean, they are trying to restrict that and change that. But that was one of the areas that we took some tests. We did some monitoring there, and found out that the air that the pollution that we recorded with our monitoring showed that if an elderly person had inhaled the air that we got in our tests, they could have ended up in the hospital in like 48 hours. And then there was one day the pollution rate was so high that if an elderly person inhaled it, they could have died within 24 hours. That's serious.
So this is also an example of what Angela was showing us, what was talking to us about, and showed me when I was down in LA Long Beach, where they run the trains through all of the 9 or so gears, and
right.
So they're not just idling; they're actually churning out a lot more exhaust because they're sort of testing them.
They tested them. When they coming off the road, this is where they go to make sure they're in that shape. In fact, if that little place, the little shack back there that they've come out of, they actually will have them in there running. And the employees that are working in there are being loaded up with that emission. That's the message we're trying to take to them. Okay, go to the next one.
And I have a question here also, Richard. Is it not true that the neighborhood Argentine is right there?
Yeah, Argentine is
literally
there.
Across the street from there, correct? Or across the tracks?
Right there. They live all around it. It's around Argentine residents surround it. Leticia, who's on the phone, grew up right next to the tracks, in her home. And she says they used to rock her to sleep at night when she was growing up. So yeah, this right there, right up against them. This again, and you can go ahead to the next one. This is just showing you how we have become a freight hub. That's the map that was just on there to show how it's encompassing our city, our metropolitan area with the trucks that's going to be traveling in. And go to the next one. This is the most valuable slide that I have because this is a picture of the warehouse situation that's in Southern California. Now, before all these warehouses moved in, this part of Southern California was just barren. It just had few homes. It's just people living out there, had some farms. But once those warehouses, like Amazon is doing in Kansas City, saw the value of them locating near the intermodals as far as the cost-saving factors for the transportation, they started building these warehouses, and all of a sudden you have just miles and miles and miles of warehouses. And so what I'm trying to do is to make people here aware of the fact, hey, this is an ongoing process. I mean, 20, 30, 40 years from now, this could be Kansas City. There's Argentine. You went to, before you go, flip back again. Flip back one more time. If you see those figures on the side, they have estimated that once this is in motion, you see they talking about Edgerton and all the containers, over 1 million containers they expect to be coming through there, that they feel that the truck traffic will increase to as much as 37,000 a day. That's 37,000 trucks that's going to be going through the Kansas City metropolitan area a day with that diesel fuel just permeating the whole environment. Okay.
Now, I just want to halt here for a minute and ask you two things to be super clear. One is just to define intermodal. Okay. Intermodal means relationship between two different modes of transportation. So in this instance, truck and train, right?
Right.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to just ask you about is so that we understand a little bit more about the health impacts of diesel exhaust. I have a little bit of a sense is it not true that diesel exhaust can result in cardiovascular issues in relation to lung disease and asthma and other illnesses? Could you talk a little bit more before we learn the next step?
There is a litany of diseases because of the what they call it, particles, fine particles that come from diesel emission. It is small enough that you can inhale it straight into your bloodstream. That is what causes the cardiovascular concern. That's where the carcinogen comes from. There's a lot that needs to be said about that because it has not yet truly been classified as a carcinogen in America. It just reached last year to the point of saying it has the possibility of being a carcinogen. I mean, I've been in meetings and I'm not going to drop anything on people who are saying this, but I've been in meetings where people have said you can't guarantee, or you can't say, it's just what you were saying, Diane, that people can get these various illnesses and diseases from it. You can't say that because it hasn't been classified as a carcinogen. So you can't prove that. We can say that, but we can't prove that, okay? We beyond a doubt. But that's why it's very difficult to deal with. Now, the World Health System has classified it as a carcinogen. It's just in the United States that it hasn't been classified as that yet. So that's why we have to go and educate people on what you can do to protect yourself. Like for one, during rush hour, based on those figures that I said we got from our monitoring, it might be good for elderly not to be outside if you live around the tracks and the highways cutting grass. Or if you have your grandbabies over to the house, maybe during rush hour, that's a good time not to have their small lungs outside because you know that it's highly possible they can receive some type of illness or some kind of hurt, harm, or health problems from being out there. That's the only thing we can do now is start educating people on how to do it. Okay? Thank you. All right, the next shot, you mentioned Argentine. This behind us where you see those containers. When we met with the railroad, and they were moving the intermodal from Argentine to Edgerton, they claimed that Argentine wouldn't have that problem anymore. This lot was not supposed to have any truck traffic. Look at it. They're using it again for storing those containers, which means trucks are coming right through that Argentine community and neighborhood still. Okay, the next one.
And then just to be clear, from what I looked at on the map, Edgerton, is that the name of it? It's slightly southwest of downtown Kansas City. Yeah. So I'm curious, it's in a less populated area.
It's in a less populated area, but what the problem is, it's out in a farm area, which has tremendous amount of growth possibility for warehouses. They already starting to go there. Their warehouses are popping in. When I take people from Kansas City who haven't been that way, it's on 35, who haven't been that way in a little while, when they drive by there and see what they've done out in Edgerton, they can't believe it. It's just those warehouses that, like they have in California, are springing up everywhere. Okay. Everywhere. That's because it's convenient, because of the intermodal being there. The train stops, they have to offload them. Now they're doing things to make a difference because they know that it's going to continue to be a problem for people. They don't want environmental groups standing out there with signs talking about them. And so they have moved from using diesel cranes to electric cranes. They've done some retrofitting with the locomotive engines to make sure they get them a lot safer. They can't get them perfect, but they get them a lot cleaner than they have been. Supposed to be, they won't run idle but about, something like 15, 20 minutes, and they'll shut themselves off. The refrigeration cars, they don't have to run all night long with the diesel burning. They are fixing them up so they'll be electric. They can plug them in when they pull into a hotel. They still be running, but they won't be diesel that's being emitted out in the air. And they've gone with the cranes or the what do you call them, things on the docks that you're picking up the crates with and stuff, forklifts. They've gone with the forklifts being battery operated. So they know that this is coming. And more attention is going to be given to you. That vast map, and I think this is my last one, is to show the kind of increase that's expected in the next 20 years. So what can you do? This is what we're talking, and this is what we're talking to our public about. What can you do to protect your community? That's what we're working with the average residents with. What can your government do to protect you and your child? And what can businesses do to protect their workers and the community? That is our given mission. That's what we're doing in Kansas City, is dealing with the goods movement. And that's the last one I had.
Wow. Thank you, Richard.
Yes.
That was very comprehensive, and this is a big task ahead, but you all are on the cusp of it, and you're helping everybody kind of get prepared for what is supposedly going to happen in terms of moving freight around through the country. What I'd like to do now is, because this is so very related to what is being proposed in Solutionary Rail, because there are other ways of transporting goods around our country, certainly this is what's being envisioned by Solutionary Rail. I'd like to invite Bill in.
Yes.
To give us any questions that you might have for Richard.
Sure. So the first thing is just thank you, Richard, and I really appreciate you taking the time. But also, I'm very curious. Clearly, we're talking about electrification of the railroads, so that could have an impact on those maintenance sheds and the trains that pass through. But still, there's potentially a lot of intermodal trucking, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see as the promise, what Solutionary Rail may or may not, what interests you about Solutionary Rail, how it could benefit or be better, or any advice you have to us as we work on this and move forward, a building coalition.
Yep.
Anything else and how we overcome the ancillary issues of the truck exhaust.
I'll leave that for last, but I'll start with this. When I got introduced to you and Diane and your electric train in Houston, it was probably the first time that I saw a light for the people who we're working with. Because of the nature of the business, we've been forced to be in a position of saying there's really nothing we can do about it. It's not a pollution that can go away. We can stop a utility company from burning coal and go to natural gas. And even though we don't like fracking, the people now that live in the immediate area, which are mostly low income, their children don't want to be growing up with the potential of getting asthma and stuff because the air they're breathing won't have that the results of fossil fuel. And so there's usually, with most pollutants, there's some solution, go to wind energy or solar. But up until I met you, the circumstance for people was this is something that we're going to have to deal with. You heard me making those comments about if it's during rush hour, maybe you don't need to be elderly, don't need to be. That's the only solutions that we had, and that was
inadequate, right?
No problem. When you telling people that's inevitable, you can't do nothing about it. So when I met you, I became an instant fan.
Oh,
I mean, in fact, I took 2 books instead of 1. So
I'm glad. We'll send you a whole box more now that you said that.
And I came back, and I mean, all of a sudden, that became a part of my conversation. In fact, when we was there, Adrian with Earth Justice was on his way to San Bernardino because they were introducing some electric cars for the railway and inside the yard. Huh. And that was, again, a very good sign because it lets you know on the horizon is a solution. There's a solution on the horizon. And, and even when you come to the trucks, we have a guy here in Kansas City that's the most well-known, popular guy for building electric trucks. We're not there, but at least now we know there is a solution that's on the horizon. And that was good for an old dog like me. I mean, I felt like, hey, this is something I can go out with people. Because, when you got to tell people that you have no choice.
That's terrible.
I mean, we made it, Leticia and I made a presentation, and a guy raised his hand and said, am I supposed to be scared or what? And that's just how serious hearing this kind of information makes real people. I'm not talking about industrial people, real people. They got kids, got circumstances that they're dealing with every day. And so we being in our position, that puts a lot of pressure on you because you feel responsible. You're the ones that's bringing this. We had two guys who almost was ready to get in a fight because one of them was going, I work for the railroad. I'm 95 years old. Look at me. I'm healthy. You get those kind of conversations. And I'm saying, I saw it as being a very difficult area to address. And I had somewhat kind of backed out.
Going back to what you had discussed earlier about sort of the impossible choices that low-income communities of color have when they're told that they'll have employment opportunities with Amazon, say, or at a new intermodal setup or these other warehouses, isn't it also even more complex than that? We've learned over the years in that oftentimes some members of the community will get some jobs, some may be temporary, some may be permanent, some may be living wage, others may not be. And oftentimes then communities wind up having sort of a whole plethora of terrible choices to make where they continue to be divided and further divided. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, this is a different kind of a question here because I think the responsibility goes to the individual. And you're going to have to find ways for people to understand that they are totally responsible for their circumstances in life. So the younger we reach them, the more realistic that becomes. The reason we have so many problems within our low-income communities is because during the time that people were in a position to learn, they did not learn. So then they reach an age of responsibility and realize that, oh man, because I didn't do what I should have been doing back then when I should have done it, now I'm in a position where I'm trapped. I'm forced to be in a position and I got children, I got responsibility, and I have needs. That's a mindset. So in the course of what we're doing, we have to also deal with the mental aspects of the individuals that's going to be our future generation. That's very important. You can't put the cart before the horse. I'm sorry. We have to make sure that we take the time to provide the future generation with the kind of leadership it needs to go into the next millennium. When you talk about employment and when you ask me why am I doing what I'm doing, it's because it's not just a thing about getting a job. It's a thing about understanding the process. And if you educate people at a younger age, they understand the electric train process, what that means. And just like Bill was saying, in the smaller towns, they start saying, oh man, I can put me up a shop when the thing stops here. And so their opportunities become more independently available instead of having to be relying on corporations to give you a job, because then you're in a system that is bureaucratic in nature, okay?
Richard, thank you so much. And Diane, thank you so much for leading this. I know we've taken extra time, but I feel like it's really been worth it. And I'm really grateful. And I also want to make sure that folks, I know that there's some report backs to have happen, and I want to keep people too much past the hour. So I think we all feel incredibly grateful to you, Richard. Thank you for your leadership and for the relationship, being willing to, hear us out down in at the Moving Forward Network Conference. That was really an honor to be there. I know Diane and I both felt that, and it was an honor to meet you. And I'm glad that we're continuing that relationship. Thank you so much.
Thank you too for inviting me. I really appreciated it.
All right,
thank you.
Welcome, Diane.
Before we leave, I just want to let everybody know how to find the organizations that you've set up and that you've been working with. One is called Breaking the Silence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The other is Building a Sustainable Earth Community.
Yes, those are two kind of entwined with each other.
All righty. And the links to them are on the RSVP to the invitation that everybody received. And then the larger coalition is called Moving Forward Network. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you.